Hello. Today we're going to be looking at the impacts of tropical storms and how we can try and reduce damage as much as possible. So our three key takeaways are to describe the strategies that we can use, to explain how effective they might be, and to also look at the limitations that they might cause. So if you have a pen and paper, it'd be brilliant to make any notes as we go through. So, first of all, we need to remind ourselves of how tropical storms can cause damage. So, if we just reiterate a few of these key points, so just looking at these different pictures, they'll identify different things that tropical storms can do. So, they will often bring with them heavy rainfall, okay, huge amounts of rainfall, and this can often lead to two things. Okay, it can lead to widespread flooding. Okay, so we'll add this box in below, and it can also trigger sometimes landslides, mudslides. Okay, and this is when the soil is fully saturated with water. That means it's full of loads of rain, and it kind of liquefies and then can let the whole land collapse in front of your eyes. So heavy rainfall can trigger these things as well. We also will have flooding that can be contributed by the sea level being pulled up or rising because of the low pressure. This is what we call our storm surge. Okay, so the low pressure pulls up the ocean, not necessarily by much, but as soon as it goes into shallow water, that lifts up significantly, and then you get this saltwater push inland, which can contribute to the flooding. So it's heavy rainfall and also the storm surge. So very lethal parts of the tropical storm. And then the final thing, we also expect very high winds, so very strong winds, okay? And they can pick up debris, throw it around and cause a lot of damage through those means, okay? So when we're looking at reducing the impact of these storms, we're basically looking at how can we try and combat these, okay? Some things are too large for us to actually solve, but how can we try and reduce that damage as much as possible? How do we try and keep people safe? So what we will do is we'll clear this and we'll move on to some of the strategies that we can use. So here are different things that we can possibly do to help reduce some of the damage. So you can look at these pictures, try and think about what they might represent. Okay, so if we have a little look at these, so what strategies can reduce tropical storm damage? If we look at the first picture, okay, this looks like a concrete bunker, also known as a storm shelter. Okay, and this is where people can seek refuge. So it tends to be people whose homes aren't as strong or aren't as safe or seek refuge. So it tends to be something that we can find in perhaps more developing or low income countries. Okay. We can also have warning systems in place. Okay. So warning systems give people advice on when to evacuate, even if they possibly can. Okay, so it can be, it's usually media that's going to give that information out. It could be via modern technology, phones, communication, online, news, radio, any way those warning systems will be able to pass that message over. Now, this will work hand in hand with this option here, which is all about predicting when it will come. So monitoring the storm's track. So this is a form of prediction. Okay. And we're tracking these weather events typically using remotely sensed data, so satellite imaging. You can tend to tell what direction it's going in, how strong it is, whether it's getting stronger, whether it's becoming weaker, and that will help us give the best information for our warning systems. Okay, but obviously storms are unpredictable, so we need to have a clearer picture of when we're going to give those evacuation notices. Okay, but if we know we're in that season when there will be tropical storms, then we can also provide advice for people to stockpile goods. This is having those emergency reserves. And then we can use that if anything happens. So if you're going to be stranded in your home with the flood waters, anything like that. Okay, so that will provide emergency goods for people when they might need it. Okay, and that can help reduce social impacts of that storm event. Then down here we can see that there is an embankment or a seawall. Okay, this is more of an embankment, but we can also find it in the form of sea walls. This can help hold back storm surge. But obviously we can see there tends to be high income countries that can afford a stronger seawall, stronger embankment, whereas a lower income country probably won't be able to afford to that strength. Okay, so that's where a problem will emerge. Okay, and the walls can be weaker. You can kind of see it's made out of soil, ground, clay, whatever they can find just to build up that barrier. Okay, and then the final part will be these shutters. Okay, um, see reinforcing your home. So storm shutters to reinforce homes. Okay, this doesn't necessarily only need to be shutters. It can be securing items on the outside, strengthening sheds. Um, Basically, the weak points of the homes, they can be reinforced to be made stronger. Okay, so if loose items are outside, they can be tied up to avoid them being picked up with the wind, so they'll fly around and cause damage. Okay, so some of these you can see that are things that need to be prepped beforehand. Okay, typically a lot of these take quite a while to build. Okay, some countries will have better accessibility to them, some countries won't. So let's have a think about what is good and what is bad about these strategies. So what we'll do, we'll hop over to the next screen. We can break these up a little bit. So we'll just pick these up into smaller parts, okay? So obviously embankments, these can be really good, okay? So they can help prevent the storm surge or flood risk, which is really important. That's one of the most fatal elements of tropical storms. So it can help prevent that. Okay, can be used in all countries. Okay, so they can be used in all countries. Just depends the material that's going to be used. Okay, whether it's going to be concrete or whether it's going to be um, rock or mud, whatever it is, to try and plug that gap. Okay, to help protect the area. So these are positives of that. It can sometimes be quite effective. However, on the other side, you need to bear in mind that actually they can be quite expensive for effective concrete sea walls, which is a massive drawback. So not all countries will have access to really build a strong embankment or seawall, and they can breach under high pressure. Then an area that was protected is now at risk, and therefore the people are going to be more vulnerable behind it. Okay, so breaches can be very dangerous, just like we saw with Hurricane Katrina. Okay, so if we look at storm shutters, so positives of these, they tend to be cheaper, and more local. So there doesn't need to be a government incentive, but it can be local people who will try and secure their own homes. So it's accessible for most people. And it avoids damage from high winds. Okay, so we've looked at preventing the storm surge and flood risk. We're looking at preventing damage from high winds here as well. Okay, so if we look at the downsides, okay, so these don't always meet high standards. So for example, in this we have metal shutters, but sometimes it can be wood boarded, won't be strong enough. Okay. Not all people can afford it. So I'll draw our attention back to low-income countries as well. And it doesn't stop from collecting other debris to cause damage. So even though they protect the property to a certain extent, the wind can still cause damage through other means. So it can still pick up other items, smash into cars, into people. So we still got that risk. Okay. These won't necessarily stop any form of flood activity as well. It's only on a local scale what people can do, what people can manage. So it tends to be in more high-income countries, this option. Okay. Then we've got our warning systems. Okay. So positives about the warning systems, they tend to be, so warning systems tend to be cheaper. Most people have access to media in some form, whether it's radio, TV, phone. Okay. As long as the communication lines are open. Okay, so warning systems tend to be cheaper. Most people will have access to that as well, and this can help people plan a safe evacuation. Okay, so they can leave the area and that will reduce social damage. That's going to be really, really good, really important for those people. Okay. However, as with everything, not everyone will have access to media. I'll just put down there, for example, rural areas, and I'll put low-income countries in brackets. Okay, so poorer people in rural areas which might lack communication infrastructure, so telephone wires and so on, they might not be able to access that warning system. Okay, storms are unpredictable. So tracks can change at any point. So you might put a warning system out to evacuate one area, and suddenly the tropical storm will change its path, and therefore that evacuation didn't need to happen, whereas another place would need that evacuation. Okay. And so because of this unpredictable nature, sometimes there is not enough time. And the better technology we have, the easier this option will be. Okay, but not everyone will have that access. Okay, so it can be good prepping people, but it needs that time, and everyone needs to have access to that. Okay, which isn't always the case. So let's look at our remaining three options. So stockpiling. So in theory, it's good because everyone can stockpile essentials. And this includes government as well for immediate response after. And if that response is good, it can reduce social death toll. Okay, so we can reduce those secondary effects when people get ill. So it can be stockpiling medicine, food, clean water, blankets for people who are, say, out in the cold, who don't have a home, need to live in short-term accommodation. Okay, so these can be really good. Tends to be everyone can have that access to those goods. However, prices can be exploited. Especially for goods that people desire. So if they know there's people are panicking, prices can be exploited by people or companies. Goods can run out if people overbuy. So some won't have the same access to items. Okay, so that's quite significant there. So not everyone will have the things that they need. Okay, so prices can be exploited, people can overbuy, and it's also there is uncertainty how long an event will last. So it might be the storm passes, but the floodwaters remain and people are stranded. So there's a lot of uncertainty with what people can do in those situations, let alone with basic things like electricity, gas, the ability to cook. Okay. Our prediction methods, we'll look at this next one. So prediction helps plan people and government. Okay. This is really good. It helps support evacuation plans, and it helps prepare certain areas. Okay, so some areas might be at more risk. So higher risk. But as with everything, there are limitations, there are negatives of it. So if we look at this, so storms can be unpredictable. Okay, they can change their track, they can become stronger and weaker. They can change, so our prediction might be wrong. Okay, so they are unpredictable. Okay, a huge amount of technology is required. This includes satellite. Okay, and not all countries have such good predict measures of prediction. So it tends to be high-income countries who are more likely to be able to predict an event to a better degree. Okay, obviously the gap is narrowing now, information is more shared around, but it tends to be lower-income countries who struggle with those prediction messages for their people. And then we'll come to our final one, these storm shelters. Okay, these are strong and robust buildings which can prevent social impacts. Okay, so we can massively reduce the death toll for anything. It's a safe haven for people. So that's a massive positive. They can be set up in low-income countries with poorer housing quality. Higher income countries tend to be brick built, concrete built. Low income countries tend to not have those same materials, so they tend to be really effective in lower income countries. However, as with each of these storms do not prevent damage from the storms to property. Just like stockpiling prediction won't prevent that damage to property, these won't do that either. They'll protect people, but they won't prevent all of that damage. So they don't protect the buildings, but they protect the people. But not all people will have access to these shelters. Okay, so they'll be dotted up in certain places, but not everyone will have access to them. Okay, and you sometimes need to fit a lot of people in a small space for what is a long period of time. So not always ideal. So this we've looked at the different strategies, we've evaluated them. So we'll just end with a little summary. So we've looked at our strategies such as warning systems, forecast, evacuation, seawalls or embankments, reinforcing buildings with storm shutters, stockpiling and using storm shelters. Okay, we've looked at the effectiveness, so whether they prevent wind damage, social damage to the population. So warning and forecasts help support evacuation, which reduces that social damage to people. Seawalls and reinforcing buildings prevents that physical damage to buildings during the event. Storm shelters give safety for people, especially in lower income countries who are unable to, say, leave the area or evacuate, but might have weaker built homes. And stockpiling ensures that effective response after, which can help reduce that social impact. Okay, so most of the things we do here will be reducing the social impact of these hazards. And then our final part, to consider limitations. Well, the duration of a hazard, especially with stockpiling, can be a massive challenge, knowing how long to buy for and if it's actually possible. Storms are unpredictable, so they can change at any point, and cost plays a role. Not everyone or not all people or countries can afford the same measures, so this will tend to lead to the impacts in certain areas being different to others. So hopefully you picked out a few new things there. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.